Hi, I'm Dominika Perkle. I'm with Bjarke Ingels Group, and you're listening to the U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. There are few architects as controversial as Paul Rudolph. His buildings, built and unbuilt, continue to inspire clients, annoy critics, and gain fame, even though he died in the mid-90s. These days, though, it's almost all smiles and admiration, and there's an important exhibition of Rudolph's work at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. It runs through March. Year-round, on certain days, however, you can visit Rudolph's former office in New York, the Paul Rudolph Institute for Modern Architecture, or PRIMA. And while you're there, you can also see the late architect Myron Goldfinger's traveling exhibition, Circle, Square, Triangle. Today, we'll talk with three people: the curator of that Met exhibition, Abraham Thomas, the executive director of PRIMA, Kelvin Dickinson, and the curator of Goldfinger's exhibition, his partner and wife, June Goldfinger. Later on, shake hands and come out swinging with Chelsee Hicks and the Holy Cats. And now, your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Modernist architecture, with its vivid edges and often imposing presence, continues to captivate and inspire and improve. Typified by the bold visions of Paul Rudolph, the geometry of Myron Goldfinger, the pure white forms of Richard Meyer, and many others, these buildings simplified, over-ornamented 19th century style and embraced the inherent beauty of large-scale glass, steel, and particularly concrete. For its fans, modernism evokes a sense of awe and wonder, strength, permanence, and the capacity for engineering and design. These complex forms and interiors invite exploration and are particularly appealing to artists, writers, architects, and photographers. Like most art, the buildings challenge the status quo, but in the nicest way possible. I find it so interesting that modernists are also fans of classical architecture. Columns and granite and arches are beautiful too. What's interesting is that while few modernists complain about classicism, classicists complain incessantly about modernism. In the first Trump term, there was an executive order called Make Federal Buildings Beautiful Again to stop future funding of federal modernist buildings. That was rescinded under Biden and will be restarted under Trump too. I don't understand all the contempt classicists have for modernism. It's a lot like hot dog people trying to get rid of hamburger people when both taste great. Let's just pass the ketchup. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle, Square, Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Palm Springs, and Malibu.
Abraham Thomas is the Daniel Brodsky Curator of Modern Architecture, Design, and Decorative Arts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, a.k.a. the Met. That's the place you see every year on Entertainment Tonight, hosting the famous Met Ball, their huge fundraiser, where all the stars of Hollywood and the arts come out. Thomas previously was curator at the Smithsonian and Sir John Soane's Museum. He lectures extensively on architecture, graphic design, fashion, and film, and was a judge in 2024's Dezeen Awards. George spoke with Abraham Thomas on the floor of the new Paul Rudolph exhibition at the Met, a few days before it opened last October. It's the first major architecture exhibition there in 52 years.
Abraham, thank you for showing me this place we're about to explore.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm excited to share the exhibition with you.
Now, the two things that America knows about the Met, one is there's a big party here every March. Is that the gala or the gala? Which is it?
It's the gala, and I think it's in May as well.
May, okay.
Yeah.
See?
But yeah.
All right.
All months of being with them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then secondly, they know this is a fantastic world-class art museum. Mm-hmm. So I went online as a good researcher and tried to find, when was the last architecture exhibition at the Met before this one? When was it?
It was a long time ago, and if one were to think about an actual purely architectural exhibition, you have to go back to 1972.
Wow.
When we did a retrospective on Marcel Breuer. We have done other sort of architecture-related shows, like, for example, we did an exhibition on the sculpture of Calatrava, but it wasn't really about his architecture. We had an exhibition on Frank Lloyd Wright's decorative arts and some of his drawings, but in terms of a real survey of a major 20th century architect, this is the first time
This is the first
since
one.
then. And I would say even the Breuer show in 72 did not include original drawings, so this is a long time in the making. And
This is fantastic.
yeah, part of my role here is to really think about the context of architecture and design within the context of an art museum, and my department, modern and contemporary. So we wanted to really think about how we can, going forward, really focus on architecture again, as you say, for the first time in a long time.
And you are the de facto architecture curator.
I am, yes,
right?
yeah. Officially the Daniel Brodsky Curator for Modern Architecture, Design and Decorative Arts. And
Okay.
so, yeah, a big part of my role is to think about how we position architecture here at the Met going forward.
So you're like an entrepreneur within this museum, really.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of entrepreneurs here at the Met, and my little corner that I try and advocate for is architecture and design. And so ever since arriving here, where at a time when the museum was really trying to engage more with architecture, it was important to think about the right exhibition at the right time. And so, Paul Rudolph for me is someone who I'd always been interested in, these beautiful drawings, the kind of fascinating ups and downs of his career. So I knew there'd never been a major exhibition on Rudolph. And so partly knowing that we had never done a major exhibition on architecture of the Met in a long time, and this kind of conundrum for me. Why has there never been a major show on Rudolph? And it's a long time coming, and I was just so delighted to be able to have this chance to showcase. Many of these objects have never been shown before, and if they have, it's been decades. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, as you well know. Yeah.
I mean, from all our listeners, we're thrilled that Paul Rudolph is getting more of an audience, because during his career, particularly certain parts of it, he wasn't really appreciated at all.
He wasn't, exactly. And I kind of approached this exhibition a little bit like a detective story to sort of unpack this fascinating career, this rapid kind of ascent as a rising star of architecture, and this sort of precipitous decline that he had in the 70s, where he sort of disappeared off the face of the earth, at least in terms of mainstream architecture, and then emerging again.
If your earth was North America,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
right?
That's true. Yeah, exactly.
But Singapore loved him.
Yeah, and then in the 80s,
Hong Kong.
and he reemerges on the global stage, as it were,
Yes.
with these fascinating projects in Singapore, Hong Kong, Jakarta. But I really wanted to understand how Rudolph's career could be mapped against these undulating peaks and troughs of late modernism, and what happened during the 60s and 70s, and the sort of rise of postmodernism, and what it was that led Rudolph from being on the page of seemingly every architecture magazine you could think of.
Oh, yes.
Having New York Times magazine covers to nothing. I mean, as Michael Sorkin has a great quote he wrote in the 90s, that during the 60s, Rudolph bestrode the world of architecture like a brush-cut colossus, and by the 70s, it was over. And that's a really interesting way to think about this amazing career, and the sort of economic and cultural, architectural sort of factors that led to many of his struggles with architecture and getting things built to the scale and the ambition he wanted during the 70s.
Has anyone told you about the secret Paul Rudolph code word?
Is it whiskey sour?
No. So whenever he did a house and the owners didn't want anybody to know that Paul Rudolph was doing the house, he would put down on the plans it was located in Jakarta.
Oh, I did not know this. Wow.
So there were several houses that until recent years people thought were in Jakarta, but actually were here, and researchers have uncovered them. We hear about those after a while, so I wanted to share that with you.
Great little factoid to know. Now I'm going to go back to the archive and reassess everything.
All right, well, let's walk around a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
And tell me what, for you, are some of the highlights of this exhibition.
Well, I mean, right here is a great place to start. And I should say the exhibition is divided thematically, but here in this section where we look at his residential projects, we're really looking at a key moment at the start of his career where he's building these extraordinary private houses.
In Sarasota.
In Sarasota. So really together with Twitchell, he's pioneering the so-called Sarasota modern style, at the same time as the case study houses in California, of course. But he's, in my mind, really borrowing from his experience in the Second World War when he's working for the Navy at Brooklyn Navy Yard, understanding the use of prefabrication, modern materials such as aluminium and plywood, and creating these beautiful buildings. But you can see alongside these smaller houses how later on in the 60s he gets to work on a much larger scale with bigger budgets for that fantastic residence for the Bass family in Fort Worth, Texas. And this section also allows us to look at that moment in the 60s where his work is really engaging with that rise of urban renewal in various cities such as Buffalo, for example, New Haven, Boston, where he's building these housing projects. We see here, for example, Tracy Towers here in New York in the Bronx, which, as you can see from some of the ephemera we have alongside, at the time was really considered a new model for public housing. And you can get a sense of that optimism that was sort of being heralded by some of these projects. And then maybe if we go over to this side, this section where we look at these experimental interiors, this really focuses on that moment in the 1970s when Rudolph has essentially disappeared from the architectural mainstream world, and instead of being published in major magazines like Architectural Forum, he's instead being published in design magazines such as House and Garden. So you see here, for example, his iconic Beekman Place residence, his own home which he experimented with and developed over decades from the 60s through to the 90s. In fact, the first time I ever heard about this house, it was described to me. At the time, I was the director of the Soane Museum, and someone said to me, "You must see this house. This is like New York's 20th century version of the Soane Museum." And it's so true in terms of how he used this building as a series of experimental test sites, as a sort of laboratory for his ideas about architectural space and the sort of connection between levels. And you can see here also in the case, we have some of these fabulous magazine spreads from House and Garden from the 70s, which give you a sense of just the drama and the spectacle of some of these interiors. And I love the fact that he's literally turning inwards during the 70s as he struggles to get architectural projects built. And it's a great manifestation of this great quote from Rudolph, where he talked about his career as spanning from Christmas lights to megastructures. And this is the Christmas lights end of his career.
Yes.
Where he's developing these really interesting sort of light curtains and using foam and jersey fabric and sort of lucite to create these, as he described it, it was like living inside a milk bottle, the kind of glassy reflective effects of being at Beekman Place.
And that's not to mention the furniture that he put together and the lighting.
Exactly.
It was a one-stop shop.
And in fact, if we go over here, you'll see some examples of the furniture that we've included. I should say that for the exhibition, I wanted this to be a really wide range of object types. Because we are at the Met and we have such a broad collection, I wanted to include not just these spectacular drawings, but also the furniture, models, material samples. This is one of my favorite sort of pairings in the exhibition. So we have one of Rudolph's iconic rolling chairs, sort of with the sort of chrome steel frame and
with 8 wheels. That's
with
unusual.
8 wheels, yeah, exactly, and lucite panels. But behind it, we have a very important Andy Warhol painting in our collection, and many people will wonder why on earth is this Warhol painting here. And the reason for that is really down to the fashion designer Houston, who during the 70s lived in a Rudolph townhouse here on East 63rd Street. There was one previous owner, but when Houston bought the house, he asked Rudolph to just to renovate it slightly and make some adjustments. And at the time, Houston had this very important collection of Warhols, which he donated to the Met later on in the 1980s. So I wanted to juxtapose this fantastic Warhol painting, which is called Before and After, which he actually painted for one of those very early Bonwit Teller displays that he used to do in the early 60s. So I love the idea of this painting, which is now in our collection, once owned by Houston when he lived in a Rudolph townhouse, but which itself had been part of a sort of retail experimental environment, very much like the way Rudolph was thinking about these interiors. And of course, Rudolph was well known early in his career for designing exhibitions at MoMA, for example, the iconic Good Design exhibition and the Family of Man exhibition. And so I love this idea of Warhol and Rudolph being in dialogue here in terms of these experimental environments that they created.
And Halston was known for his incredible parties, and his townhouse, I guess you would call it, was filled with multiple levels, which was a Rudolph signature move.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's actually wonderful looking through these drawings as I went through the archive and now here in the exhibition to see how Rudolph revisits this idea of multiple levels and how he creates an extraordinary sort of spatial efficiency where he takes, for example, at the Yale building, at the Art and Architecture building, across something like 7 stories, he creates something like 32 different separate levels through these slippages between the floors of half levels, quarter levels. You see him even earlier doing that with one of his early architectural offices in New York, which we opened the exhibition with, where you can also see these experimental sort of levels. And again, at Beekman Place, the house and townhouse, as you mentioned. So he, time and time again, he's thinking about how to create these extraordinary experiences of space through this very careful positioning of floor levels and vistas and sort of views through different floors.
We know that some of this material came from the Paul Rudolph Institute for Modern Architecture.
That's right.
Where else did you source all of this great exhibition from?
Well, the main lender and our sort of key collaborator on this exhibition, without whom we wouldn't be able to put this exhibition on, is the Library of Congress. Rudolph gave his archive to the Library of Congress just before he passed away. So the vast majority of these spectacular drawings are all from that archive at Library of Congress. None of them had been framed before, and none of them had been lent before as well from the archive. In addition to the Library of Congress, we also have some very important loans from the Museum of Modern Art. Rudolph, during his lifetime, gave a number of drawings to MoMA. We also have probably the most famous Paul Rudolph drawing in existence is this one right here, the famous perspective section drawing of Yale's Art and Architecture building, which really defines, in my mind, how Rudolph was so synonymous with this idea of the perspective section drawing. And
he was dean of that school at one time.
And he was dean of the architecture school, exactly. And so that moment in the 60s where he, before he's even 40, he's appointed the dean at Yale. And that moment in New Haven is so important to his career because it's really when he gets the chance to build these large-scale civic commissions. For example, the Temple Street parking garage, which you see here blown up as a huge graphic in the exhibition. Experimental housing, such as the Oriental Masonic housing you see here. So Yale was a really important moment for Rudolph because he got to build that brand new art and architecture building and sort of was splashed across every cover of every architectural magazine at the time.
Now, I know that in your previous incarnations curating at other institutions, you were always the drawings guy, right?
Often at times, yes, that's true, yeah.
You really emphasize the importance of finding these drawings, restoring these drawings, framing the drawings, and letting people see the genius behind the people that were putting them together, which is very different from photographs, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I've, as you say, I've always had a love of drawings, particularly design drawings. I sort of looked after that collection at the V&A. And for me, the fascinating thing about design drawings is that they're really the sort of engine room of the design process. And many of these drawings I find fascinating, probably primarily because they really exhibit the talent, the unique talents that Rudolph had as a draftsman. He was not only supremely talented at creating these drawings, but also was so rare as the lead architect who would also be responsible for these renderings. And we see these trademark moments like the sort of swirling figures that he would create, and these sort of little telltale clues that that's a Rudolph drawing. What I love about these drawings is that, I've seen these in the flesh, for example, at the Library of Congress archive where they're sort of rolled, not framed, and you really get your nose up to these drawings. But even now when they're framed, looking really beautiful on the walls, hung vertically, I see more and more details every single time I look at these drawings. They sort of unfold in front of you the more and more you spend time with them, and you just see the extraordinary levels of detail that he created with these drawings.
And what he's referring to are not blueprints.
No.
These are real works of
these
art.
Are ink and graphite on paper, colored
Some
pencil.
of them 6 feet long or
6
so,
feet
at
long.
least.
Yeah, many of them bigger than most of the visitors to the exhibition. And there's a couple of drawings here that really give a sense of this idea of working process. So one of my favorite things is seeing on the edges of these drawings, the so-called marginalia, you see the sort of energy and the kind of discussions that happen literally on the periphery of these drawings where there are calculations or there's little notes or even just trying to test out the flow of the ink and the pen. And so you're really reminded that these are physical artifacts that sat around in an architectural office. There are these little brown splotches which are perhaps coffee, perhaps glue, who knows what, but it really gives you a sense of these objects as living artifacts that had a life in the studio, and they were one-off unique objects. And I think for our audiences at the Met, drawings are, of course, a huge part of our collection, a very important thing that we've done here. And so for the first time in a long, long time, we're really showcasing the art of architectural drawing through the lens of this very important architect who was so famous for these drawings.
Now, at Disney, of course, whenever you leave an attraction, there's a gift shop.
Right.
And, of course, the Met has a huge gift shop here.
Yeah, we have a number of gift shops.
And you have at least one item that people can purchase at the gift shop?
At least one. We have a catalogue for this exhibition,
Yes.
which I'm proud to work on, and also a chance to really showcase these drawings. And we really worked hard on getting the reproductions right and getting the right paper stock. And I think that book also is a really nice summary of not just his drawings, but also some of the ephemera you see here, these magazine spreads and cover stories on Rudolph. And another great discovery for me with this research was discovering these very large models, which had been created for decades and had never been photographed before, let alone been shown in public before. So we've got pictures of those models in the catalogue, and they're the only two things which you don't see here today. But the catalogue I'm really excited about because it's going to be the long-term legacy from the exhibition. And of course, it's not the first major survey of his work. Tim Rohan's great book, which came out about 10 years ago. But this will be a sort of way of summarizing the way we've approached Rudolph's career through this exhibition.
And the name of the catalog is?
It's the same as the exhibition. So Materialized Space, the architecture of Paul Rudolph, published with the Met and Yale University Press.
So I have to ask, because, I'm a tourist, can I get a Paul Rudolph coffee mug or T-shirt with this exhibition
possibly,
too?
Yeah. I know that the Paul Rudolph Institute for Modern Architecture in Kelvin, they're very keen to sort of work with our retail team. So I can't promise anything right now, but yeah, there's lots of possibilities with merchandise for Paul Rudolph.
This is really great. When people come to the museum, how do they find their way around to find the exhibition?
So the best way is just to head to the Modern and Contemporary galleries, which is essentially in the sort of southwest corner of our building. And then when you walk through the first floor of the Modern and Contemporary galleries, you find yourself at what we call the Kimmelman Gallery, which is where we're standing now. This is our department's temporary exhibition space. And we'll be open until mid-March. So we're very excited to use this opportunity to engage these architectural audiences, which I hope have been sort of just waiting for something like this to happen, especially at the Met.
And Abraham, if this goes well, there could be a future for you here.
I hope so. I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Thanks so much for talking with me.
Thank you, George. It was a real pleasure. Thanks for coming in.
That was George with Abraham Thomas at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. June and Myron Goldfinger founded a design firm in 1965, with Myron focusing on architecture and June crafting the interiors. In 2023, after Myron's passing, June curated 2 exhibitions of his work in New York City, one at the Mitchell-Algus Gallery and one at the Paul Rudolph Institute for Modern Architecture, or PRIMA, which runs through March. Here's George's conversation with PRIMA's Executive Director Kelvin Dickinson and June Goldfinger, recorded at the PRIMA Goldfinger exhibition in New York.
Kelvin, what is this mystical place that we're sitting in? Because people should really come and visit this place.
So we're actually sitting in a Paul Rudolph Design building, one of his last buildings in New York City. It's the Moduliter building, which he created to house the Moduliter Lighting Company that he founded in 1976. He died in 97, and the 2 floors we're currently sitting in were added posthumously. And we use them as our event space, where we are currently hosting a Myron Goldfinger show.
And this building has many levels. What, 8 levels?
6.
6, okay. Aren't there some underground places too?
Oh, yeah, we don't count the basements.
Okay.
That's
The
where
crypts.
all the fun is, yeah. Yeah, all the lighting is actually made on site in 2 sub-basements. Also, the Paul Rudolph furniture is made here. Anything that Paul did that needed to be manufactured, he wanted it to be made on site. And so we have 2 sub-basements.
And this is on 58th Street in New York City.
Yes.
And you have a special Friday event every now and then. What is that?
We have a first Friday, which now has become so popular, we have a second Saturday, which I've been told is not really always the second Saturday, so I've got to change the name. It's an open house. We have about 80 people that come, max, because it's a small space. And we open up the entire building. People can mill about and ask questions about Rudolph, and now Goldfinger's on display upstairs, so we've got a lot to see. And we open it on the first Friday from 6 to 9, and then on Saturdays from 1 to 4. But you have to check our website for the dates.
Okay. June, how did this exhibition come about here at Paul Rudolph's facility?
Well, number one, George, it was really due to you who put a lovely little note about the exhibit on your Monday newsletter. And Kelvin called me, and Paul Rudolph is the only other architect outside of Lou Kahn who Myron and I had a passion for. Paul was Myron's teacher, and when Myron was at Pratt as a professor, he brought in Paul to do as a lecturer. And the two of them would also go to the Russian tea room and have whiskey sours. And so I thought it was a terrific idea when Kelvin called and we had a discussion. I had no idea it was going to be so wonderful. I mean, to kind of give over authority to someone else about Myron is a real trust thing for me. And I just knew, meeting Kelvin, that somehow things were going to be really, really good. And I think we're sitting in something on this floor with all of the models and all of the renderings and all of the working drawings. And it's really, really good.
Kelvin, this isn't your first rodeo with an exhibition. You've been doing exhibitions here quite a while.
Yes, we originally started our first exhibit celebrating the Paul Rudolph Centennial. That was back in October of 2018. And we've done a poster exhibit with Judith York Newman of architectural posters. And we have an event space, 2-story event space, that we love to just have something that celebrates architecture of some sort on display. So we're looking forward to do more in the future.
Now, concurrently with all this about Myron Goldfinger, who we're going to talk more about, there's also a big Paul Rudolph exhibition in town.
Yes.
What's that about?
So over at the Met, Abraham Thomas, who was one of the new people to join the Met from the Sir John Soane residence in London, was very interested in doing a show on Paul Rudolph. And I told him that we probably could do something where we could loan him some materials from the Paul Rudolph estate, and he was interested in pairing it up with drawings from the Library of Congress, amongst others. And that was a long time ago, and then just out of the blue he says, we're going to go ahead and do it. So he came through and met with us and picked a lot of material from the estate, personal effects that Rudolph collected. We have some brick samples from some demolished Paul Rudolph buildings, some furniture, etc. And it's paired up with drawings that they were able to borrow from the Library of Congress, which most of them have not been seen before. And what we're very excited about is one of the projects that's going to be featured is our building. So you're going to have the model of the modulator building and the original pen and ink rendering on display. So we hope that people will go see the show there, learn about Rudolph, and be interested, and then come see the Myron Goldfinger show in our building.
And June, there's a third show put on by Mitchell Alkus. What's that about?
That show is put on really by Kelvin. It's his show. It's at Mitchell, who is a terrific person and considered quite the fox in art circles. It is the original community work, which Myron was very broadly published. And it's also the unbuilt projects. Kelvin has done a remarkable job. The actual images are huge, beautifully framed in the same way that it is here. And it's just really just a story you want to know about, and visually just really tempting. Again, Kelvin did a great job and responded to Myron's ethos faithfully.
June, you've told me this story, but I'd love for you to tell our listeners about how you met Myron and how it was instant love.
Okay. Okay, once again, George, it's as though we're sitting and having a lunch. I was doing my graduate work at Parsons, and that was really just fine and dandy. And I read in the New York Times, half a page, wonderful architect story by Barbara Plum, who was the best editor of the New York Times ever had when it came to architecture. Picture of him, the whole picture of the project, picture of everything. And I just looked at the pictures and I said, this guy is so good, everybody should just go home. Forget about it, just give up. He's got it. And so about, I don't know, six months or so After that, a bunch of friends were getting together, people who were already in their industries of photography or fine arts, and said, "Oh, you've got to meet Myron Goldfinger." And I thought, oh, God, not another one of those. And sure enough, I walked in, and he was sitting directly in the front towards the window, a direct line from where I was. I took one look at him, and I said, now, mind you, I'm barely 21. And I took a look at him, and I said, "You're mine."
And this was important because, like Katharine Hepburn, you were engaged to somebody in Philadelphia?
Yes, a mainline Philadelphia, and I won't mention the name in case he hears this. It had about 3 names, and it was the 4th or 5th, and it was, somebody who would actually open the car door for you, which I can't say that Myron ever volunteered to do that. I think he maybe hoped that I would open the door for him. We were together since that day. I left Parsons. I said, adios. I'm going to where, the swells live. And we just have had an absolutely wonderful time. I mean, we shared a partner's desk unless he was making wildebeest noises when I was on the telephone trying to charm someone. We just had a really great relationship for almost 60 years. It seems almost impossible, that we didn't kill each other as partners and as raising a family. But somehow we did it. And he's terribly missed. His work, I still am astounded by when I see it. It's just, the volumes he was able to create, the flying buttress stairs. And he did it all with a scribble. And I know this because Myron never angsted and said, "Oh, I am working, I'm here for a week, I'm closing the door and come back in a month." Never. That wasn't Myron. It was a scribble. It was, graphite on tracing paper or Bic pen on cheap line paper. It was inherent to him. He resolved all of these volumes, all of these intersections with a scribble, and he says he doesn't know how he did it. I always told people that that's what he did. No one believed me. And then Jay Korst did a lovely video of him, and that's exactly what he said.
Kelvin, the exhibition here is called Circle, Square, Triangle, and it references the geometry of Myron Goldfinger. In addition to being a curator and a preservationist, you're also an architect. So how would you describe Goldfinger's work to someone who's not an architect?
The Goldfinger show is called Circle, Square, Triangle because that was what Myron said was the essence of his architecture. He started out doing things in the 60s that were very much in keeping with something I would see either Paul Rudolph or someone of that time period doing, very linear, very detailed, very functionalist. And then it almost was like he broke out when he discovered to use circles, squares, and triangles as volumes in his spaces. I remember being in architecture school and seeing a photograph which later turned out to be the Schulman residence, and remembering that that was the one photograph of Myron's work that I ever saw when I was in school. But it was that influential that it was referenced in our history of architecture class. It was fascinating to see in this exhibit that, much like with Rudolph, everything that he did was kind of a development of something he'd done before, which is why I think it's so important that when it comes to an architect's work, you don't want to split it up. You don't want to cherry pick a project and say this was him, like a sum total of his architectural thought. But you get to see how it gets developed over time, and some might be more successful and lead to something that gets even better later, or some might be a one-off that is amazing, and everyone finds something here that's something that they identify with. His work, it's otherworldly in the sense that it's volumetric and almost postmodern, but still of the time of the 70s where you have that late modernist feel to it. What really drew me to his work was the interiors when we saw the perspectives. We were scanning all of his archives. We're cataloging them. We don't have a project list, so we're kind of cherry-picking drawings and saying, okay, this is this project, that's that project. And the show really came about from finding all these wonderful drawings and saying, this is so good, we want people to see the original material. There's a lot of it here. Some of it is very triangular. Some of it's got very circular roofs, very circular balconies. And I thought that it was interesting that that was kind of what got him interested in architecture, was the volumetrics of the spaces he was able to create. That being said, the show's also called The Houses I Never Lived In, which I think is a wonderful reference to Myron. We're growing up. Everyone wonders, well, what makes architects want to be an architect? And I know why I wanted to be an architect, but everyone's got their own personal story. And for Myron, the story was walking down the street in Atlantic City and seeing the houses of these people that were very well-to-do or better off than his family was as he was walking home to his own house. And he actually says in a video we have playing here that I'm always designing houses I never lived in as a boy, which I thought was, it just hit me in the gut when June told me that story, because I felt like that's the essence of Myron. He was always designing, and I think every architect does this, because most architects I know don't afford the houses they're designing usually.
Right.
But I think that most architects are always designing places that they wish they could live in for someone else that does get to live in it. And I thought that was the essence of the show, was very interesting in that sense.
Even though this exhibition is about the houses that Myron didn't live in, there is one that he did live in.
There's two, yes, and I got clocked by someone who visited us who said, "You're wrong."
It's 3.
Oh, 3.
3? Okay.
Anguilla.
Okay.
Oh, it gets worse the longer we sit here. There's more and more mistakes.
No, 4 because we have the apartment.
Well, but the apartment's not on display.
No,
in
it's
the
not
show.
on display, but Myron made it into a bento box.
Yeah.
It's like living in perfection.
June, your house in Wacabuck, New York, was built what year?
70.
70. And you've been in it ever since?
Ever since.
It was memorialized for the general public, I think, first in a cartoon by Alan Dunn, which is fantastic. And it's on our website. And it's also been published in so many places.
It was a rocket that took off. I can only say that Myron's vision for this house was so complete. It wasn't only in that the volumes for the exterior were beyond exciting with 10-foot cantilevers. We lived and didn't die by engineers. It was really, really exciting to live in. The volumes are just, I to this day go around the house and say, I love it.
It really is, I think, one of the most unusual houses in America. Because you enter into it and it's like coming through, say, a Cambodian jungle, and there's this temple that rises, 30 feet, 40 feet into the air?
41 feet.
41 feet into the air, and you go into the sliding glass door to enter into the house, and then you discover that to access the rest of the house, you have to do what?
Well, you have to go through the first floor and try to discover the spiral staircase that goes up to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floor. And then there's a section that's over a bridge, which is a really amazing greenhouse. And that goes on to a 3-story element of architecture. And so in case you didn't have a really great time with the main house, just go over to what we call the studio, and you'll really be blown away.
And these cantilevered terraces seem perfectly positioned for, say, a Rapunzel to let down her golden hair, right, and climb up. I could see that happening.
I've tried that a number of times without success. The cartoon you reference is a cartoon of me being on the 4th floor, which is one of these fabulous decks, and the UPS man is on the in front door, and I'm saying, do I really have to sign for it?
You can see this cartoon as well as all of Myron's houses at usmodernist.org/Goldfinger. Kelvin, you have, besides putting on this exhibition, I don't think people really understand what it takes when an architect passes away. Usually their materials are not well organized at all, or they're in a barn or a basement or an attic or a storage unit somewhere.
Or 12 metal garbage cans, yes.
12 metal garbage cans, right? So what is the journey of those garbage cans to start getting organized and ultimately some of the materials into an exhibition?
Well, at first I want to maybe say why we do what we do. And it kind of references back to something that Paul had said originally, when Paul, who was such a successful architect, at the end of his life wanted to give his archives somewhere, no one would take them. Columbia didn't want them. Yale didn't want them.
Really?
A number of other places didn't want them. And he was actually saying to his friends, who are board members of our group, I'm afraid I'm going to be forgotten. And I think every architect of a certain age where they're hand drafting, so therefore they're almost like an artist, they leave a lot of material behind. It's not like today where everything's on a computer and a corporate firm just simply hits erase and can erase all the files if they wanted. In some cases, these guys are sole practitioners, and they leave material behind that the family doesn't know what to do with in some cases. Now, June's a special case because she was working with Myron in the firm. But in most cases, the family is left with material, and they're not sure if it's valuable, if it should be saved. If they throw it away, is anyone going to miss it? It might be for houses that no longer exist. The way I come at it is preservation of architecture ultimately needs access to the original archives or the original materials, because in a lot of cases, you'll walk down a street, you'll see a house, it's in disrepair, the windows are broken, the roof's falling off, the front porch might be falling off, and you're just going to look at it and say, that house has always looked that way, that house is ugly, let's just tear it down, the land is more valuable. But in some cases, an architect was involved, there were drawings and photographs taken of it when it was first built, there were specifications written, and a lot of material of that house exists such that if it's a good house and the material is available, someone will ultimately have access to it and save the house if there's enough notoriety and the house material available. So in that case, that's kind of become our mission. In our case, our mission was originally from Rudolph, who wanted a study center for modern architecture, not just his own work. And then that was coupled with, I had a personal experience giving a lecture, and I tell this story every time people come to visit during an open house. I was doing a lecture about Rudolph, and I used some photography by Tom Yee. Now, Tom Yee was a great photographer who shot a lot of Rudolph's work in the early 70s. And I was giving a lecture, and a guy that I was presenting with afterwards said to me, Tom Yee's still alive. He lives in New York. Why don't you call him up? But do it quickly. He's 96 years old. So I called the phone number, and it was disconnected. And the sad thing was the more I looked into it, and if anyone here knows the story and knows anything different, please call me. But I tried to reach out, and what I found out was that the storage space in Chelsea had been cleared by the landlord the moment they didn't get any rent checks.
Right.
And all the material, probably hundreds of thousands of negatives, slides, photographs of Rudolph projects were all just thrown in the garbage and destroyed. Now, it's not brain surgery. It doesn't take any special skills to learn how to digitize the material. And with computer storage becoming so cheap, it's really just a matter of manpower to take this material, scan it, and put it up online. I know, for instance, your website has a ton of material. It is very labor intensive, but in some cases where you have access to the original material, it may not be useful for a house this year, but 10 or 15 years from now, a house might be in severe disrepair.
Right.
And that material being out there might make the difference between that house being torn down and being ultimately saved.
Which is so important because when you tear down a house, you really rip away a whole section of an architect's life.
Yes.
They've spent a year, 2 years, 3 years working on that, particularly if it was a large house.
In some cases, and this is where I disagree a little bit with archivists in the sense that they used to say the one person that doesn't want to lend books out of a library is the librarian.
Uh-huh.
And that is because they're afraid it's never going to come back. You know, they collect and they don't want to lend. And in the case of this, because it's all digital, most of the people that want to see it are students. And you need to elevate the career of the architect because a lot of these people, I mean, when I was in school, we never talked about Paul Rudolph. And now a lot of people know about Paul Rudolph. And we hope the same is going to be true for Myron. But there's also other architects out there that are similarly small shops that were very good in the 70s that are coming of an age where their work might be also similarly destroyed. And families or storage facilities are full of this wonderful work. And it's just a matter of discovering it, finding it, digitizing it. And then at least there's the possibility of that memory not being lost.
Exactly.
And that's where I think our mission has kind of grown from being just about Paul Rudolph and Myron to being more about preserving an entire period of architectural history that's currently being lost.
Well, you are the Institute for Modern Architecture,
Yes.
so it has expanded.
Yeah, we didn't want to be everyone's just their bucket list for Paul Rudolph.
Right.
We wanted to kind of grow into a bigger mission.
Now, June, in working with Myron all those decades, being an international designer, having your own gallery and stores, and working with people that folks would know all over the world, you have recently taken on a new job description here at the Institute. So what have you been doing here all day, every day, for weeks?
I've basically been cataloging Myron's work and scanning, which I have learned how to do. It's really wonderful because I have probably the last person who will be able to tell you exactly who it was, how it came about, how it was executed, how it was changed, all of the above. And so what Kelvin is out on a mission to do is to make this very easy for me to then impart exactly what happened when.
And you are essentially the index for all of these cans of plans and things that have been put together and now digitized and now put into flat files and made available, because you lived through all this.
I lived through all of it. It was a heck of a lot of fun. And I was able to be part of what Myron did. When I did the interiors, more than likely I designed the furniture, the lighting, everything went into it, but really it was the response to volumes. My job description has been to be the last person who knew Myron. And if it's cataloging, digitizing, putting into order who the client was, when it was, what was the intent, going over with Kelvin what the job entailed, how was the response to the client, how was the response to the volumes, to the site, because I knew before Jake Gorst did the video that he did these scribbles. And I also knew that if I was working on a project that I had to respond intuitively to his intuitive creation. How do you respond to these beautiful big volumes? You don't muck them up.
Myron did a house for your parents early on.
Yeah.
Is that house still with us?
Yes, it is. The person who was the next owner and has been for 40 years now has kept it in pristine condition. It has not changed it, so it remains a beautiful work that's extant to itself.
Oh, wonderful. Have most of Myron's houses survived?
I would say not. There is a time and place where certain clients have decided that they've been so inspired by someone like Myron that they're inspiring themselves to make changes.
But they're still standing, most of them, I would think.
Most of them are standing for sure. The clients who've come back and wanted to have modifications or additions have been, with great elan, been paid back in spades for having a wonderful structure modified. Myron's work was very specific. It really didn't want anyone else to modify it.
Kelvin, as you look at Paul Rudolph's career and Myron Goldfinger's career, who are some of these next generation of people that are coming up that we need to look to preserve their work?
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. It's interesting because there's a switch towards, I'd almost say in the 80s, where people took more seriously archives and preserving the drawings. So what worries me and keeps me up at night are the people that, and I do this all the time when I go to bookstores, you go to a used bookstore, you pull out the book on architects from the 70s, and those are the people's work that you don't see because it wasn't digitized that I think keeps me up at night, that I think needs to be saved. The stuff that you see today, I think, is very well in good condition or kept in some way. Norman Foster is doing a wonderful job with his foundation. Mm-hmm. Richard Meyer is doing a wonderful job preserving his models. And I don't think that there's going to be a period where we have to worry about some of these collections because it's automatically assumed that they're going to be scanned and archived at a certain point
I.M. Pei's work is in good hands, for instance.
Right. But there are a lot of smaller companies and people that you only find online or in books from the 70s where they're wonderful drawings, and I'll see a one-off drawing and I'll look this person up and I cannot find their name anywhere. So you know they lived, you know they were an architect because you saw a rendering, but what other work did they do? I mean, you see one wonderful drawing in a book, and you've got to imagine there must be hundreds, if not thousands, of other drawings they did that were maybe as equally wonderful. I did want to say back to something that June said about houses and things getting changed. You know, part of being a preservationist is always being disappointed.
I think that'll be your immortal line.
Yes,
Kelvin.
I was always disappointed. But what we try to do with the archives when we put them together, and I said this to June, and June is a perfect person to work with because she remembers everything. She'll tell me what people were wearing at the dinner when the client first talked to Myron and what they had for dinner. Those people are perfect because for me, and I know architects feel this way in general, when you are drawing a project, and maybe the computer makes it a little bit less likely, but back in the day when everyone was hand drafting, it was like having a child. You gave birth to something, it grew up, and you hope that it continues beyond you. And in the case of the archives, the way we treat them, I want to know everything. And we, as a rule, also include the wrinkles. So if, for instance, I know Paul was sued because something happened, we don't shirk from showing that, because that's something that people can learn from, or something that makes the project seem, more real to people. And so, for instance, I wrote the landmark report for our building, and we used all the archives that we had from the Paul Rudolph collection downstairs. And we kept in there all of the financial troubles that he had, because it made the fact that we kept this building here so much more special. And that's what I think the stories for these buildings ultimately have to be. Did the client tear it down? Yes. Why? Maybe something was not right. Maybe there was a roof drain missing. Maybe something happened. But I think that the stories are there that make the project seem more alive and more special, and not that separates it from being someone just writing a book and having a photograph in a book and maybe 2 pages of description. Because ultimately, I think for architecture, you have to save the buildings. You have to walk through the buildings in order to understand what people were trying to do. And in that case, architecture can't just be a photograph in a book or a floor plan in a book. You have to kind of show it all together. And that was something that I really respected June when she came to me about the show. She said, I don't want this to be an art exhibit. I don't want to show pretty pictures. I want it to be, you look at it and you say, this stuff was built. And so our show is all about models. Our show is about renderings. Our show is about original photographs. Our show is about technical drawings, because you're going to get all different kinds of people here. And that's the same way of saving buildings. You have to save all of it in order to save a building. The construction drawings, as well as the photographs of what these places looked like when they were brand new, so that people can think, maybe I could make that building look like that again.
The Paul Rudolph exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Goldfinger exhibition at the Paul Rudolph Institute for Modern Architecture, and also at the Mitchell Algus Gallery. All of these will be available through the early spring. Kelvin, June, thanks so much for talking with me.
It was just a super pleasure.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
That was George's conversation with Kelvin Dickinson and June Goldfinger.
Chelsee Hicks grew up in the small town of Neodesha, Kansas, famous for being the first oil well, before high school in Tucson and graduating with honors from the University of Arizona. Go Wildcats. Singing since she was 14, her inspirations include Ella Fitzgerald, Rosemary Clooney, Doris Day, Peggy Lee, and Rizzo from Grease, her breakthrough role in high school. She's been the lead vocalist for the Manhattan Dolls, 80s and Gentlemen, and Blue Dream, and now she's performing all around Arizona with the Holy Cat Swing Club, whose latest single you'll hear later today. Welcome, Chelsee.
Hi there. Thank you. You did your research.
We did. Our team is really great. Thank you. I just love your performances. They are really electric. And you put on this fabulous wig and persona. So my first question is, what does it take for you to get ready to perform?
Well, I suppose my first question back to you is, in what context? Because I wear lots of different wigs and lots of different costumes. I wear lots of different hats. But if you're talking about With Holy Cat Swing Club specifically, that's all my own hair, baby. That's all natural.
All right.
And so that is Chelsee. That's me. Yeah, I suppose I step into a couple different characters. I do a Marilyn Monroe. There's a local theater here that does concerts, and I will often be part of some sort of review, with a couple, like a Christmas review this holiday season, for example. I'll do probably 5 shows there, and we wear a wig.
Yeah.
Would you like me to dig into Holy Cat Swing Club specifically?
Sure.
I like to get prepared usually by the makeup. The makeup gets me in the zone because I am usually juggling a lot throughout the day. And any performer, if this is what they do, they might be able to tell you that most of our work is in the evenings. Mm-hmm. So you have all day to be in a completely different mindset, or perhaps you're in rehearsals or something. But for me, I have a day job that's, I've been a writer for a tech company, and that's been all of this year. My contract ends soon, so I'll just get to be singing full time after
awesome.
this, which is what I like to do. But for me, the makeup switches me over from techie brain, writing brain into creative brain. And then you show up for your call time, your sound check, and always seeing the fellas in the band kind of gets me excited, and the venue where we'll be performing. It's all part of the prep.
And people of all ages are really attracted to your group. I mean, basically from 8 to 80, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's my favorite part about it. You mentioned I was a singer with the Manhattan Dolls, and that's a group that does 30s and 40s music in the style of the Andrews Sisters. So it's 3 ladies. So I wouldn't call myself the lead singer of that. I'm just, part of the group. But the mission of the Dolls was the woman who started it was a former USO girl. So it's been so important. And my experience in music has been of that era to bring it back to life and to keep it alive. I have nieces and nephews who dance and come to my shows, and they bring their friends. And it is really amazing that, younger folks now can know this music that's 100 years old.
So you're the cool aunt, right?
Oh, you know it. Speaking of the makeup, because I don't wear makeup much in my real life, but I'm often with my nieces and nephews when I'm getting ready for a show, and can we watch? And so we all line up in front of the mirror, and they watch me get glammed up and turn into someone else.
Tell me about this first song. This is the new single out from the Holy Cats. Your Grandma Did It.
Yes, that is our first original. So to tell you a little bit about the Holy Cats, I'm the new girl on the scene. There was a singer, Julie Buck, the late singer. I think the group started during the pandemic, and it's really blossomed around town, and especially in the swing scene, because there's not a lot of that around here. So I'm really grateful that they took on the project of bringing that music to Tucson, which is where I'm located, Tucson, Arizona. But I'm still learning things. And often it just looks like I show up at rehearsal and they say, all right, here are all these songs that we've been playing for a few years. Will you learn them? And every now and then they'll pull from my song list. And Your Grandma Did It is the first original that they threw at me. And I believe Tony Spear, he and Mark Rosen, Tony plays the guitar, and then Mark Rosen plays the saxophone and clarinet. Mark does most of the musical arrangements, and then Tony wrote the lyrics for this song. And it's basically in response to people who hear our music and they say, oh, it's so fun. I just wish I could dance. And Tony would say, well, your grandma did it. Your grandma did it every Saturday night. So it's a fun song about a girl swing dancing to the music of World War II.
Here's Chelsee and the Holy Cats with Your Grandma Did It.
Chance. Headed on down to the USO. Everybody loved to watch her go. The band played swing from WW2. The band played Benny and Duke and Louie too. Kids would swing dance all night long. Everybody had a favorite song. Your grandma did it. Your grandma did it. Your grandma did it. Your grandma did it. Your grandma did it every Saturday night. buy that girl a ring. Sally and Jack had a love so true. They had your mama and she had you. Well, your grandma did it.
Grandma did it.
Your grandma did it.
Your grandma did it.
Your grandma did it every Saturday night. Sing it with me now, boys. Your grandma did it.
Grandma did it.
Your grandma did it.
Your grandma did it.
Your grandma did it every Saturday night. Don't you know, one more time? Your grandma did it.
Grandma did it.
Yes, your grandma did it.
Grandma did it.
Your grandma did it every Saturday night. Ooh!
That is a really enchanting song. You know, I have a swing dance background as well. I met my wife on the swing dance floor.
No way.
And I always tell people, if you want to learn to dance, if you can count to 8 and go in a circle, you can pick it up. It's just not that hard, right?
Well, that's what they say. I still get very nervous when someone asks me to dance. I'm stepping on toes left and right. I'm better on my own, but I love the initiative. If someone's going to ask me, I don't want to turn them down.
There's a lot of mid-century modern in Arizona, in Tucson and Phoenix, a lot of venues and houses and places like that. Have you been to some of those or have a favorite venue that you like to perform in?
Oh my gosh. Each venue is so different. I've enjoyed the Jackrabbit Lounge is a space that once upon a time it was a steakhouse and then it turned into a comedy club and then I think like a gentleman's club. So it's got all these past lives in it. And right now the way they have it decorated is very retro and you step inside and to me it feels transformative. Like you're going through time travel, which just sets up the scene for what I like to do. So I really appreciate a venue that takes a theme seriously, or even better, if they're authentically retro.
I was wondering about like the Valley Ho in Phoenix, which is a very retro hotel.
I have not.
They should book you guys immediately. I mean, that would be just such a hit.
Oh, you hear that, Valley Ho?
That's right. This building is completely retro, and they have stuck with it. They have done wonderful renovations in that same style, and you were transported back a good 65 years pulling into the parking lot.
Well, that does half my job for me.
Right, right. Well, we'll publicize you. Absolutely. This next song sounds like it was written in the 40s, but it wasn't. It was written in the early 2000s by the performer Tom Waits, made popular by Diana Krall. Here's Chelsee with Temptation.
Rusted brandy in a diamond glass. Everything is made from dreams. Time is made from honey, slow and sweet. Only the fools know what it means. Temptation, temptation, temptation. I can't resist. Well, I know that he is made of smoke, but I've lost my way. He knows that I am broke, but I must pay. Temptation, temptation, temptation. I can't resist. Dutch pink and Italian blue. He is there waiting for you. My will has disappeared, and now confusion is oh so clear. Temptation, oh temptation, temptation, I can't resist.
Chelsee, I'm curious to know, since you've cut across a lot of genres, what's your favorite music to play at home?
Gosh, this is always such a sad question to answer because I am almost always just rehearsing. Because I'm in, like you mentioned, an 80s band, or I've got the jazz standards, or I'm doing Christmas music, I'm in a couple country bands, I'm almost always just trying to freshen up my repertoire. And that's something I've had to eat a hefty slice of humble pie because I'm spread across so many genres that almost anytime I get to talk to audiences afterwards, they come up and they expect me to be the expert on this category and this genre. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just learned this music last week. And so they give me all the tips. They give me the, well, you really should listen to this version, or your voice reminds me of this person. So I'm constantly learning, but I have to often admit that I don't know as much as a lot of my musician colleagues. But I will say, in a way, to answer your question, the music that just lights me up is the 30s and 40s. There's something about it that, like, it speaks to my soul. And I think it suits my voice, too. It's a lucky coincidence there.
I really love that period, too. When I was growing up and my mom had these records, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, they didn't appeal to me at all, but a little later on, it just locked in right now.
Right.
I remember having an argument with my mom one time about Dean Martin, because I didn't like any of Dean Martin's music. It just sounded like old drunk guy, crooning. And now, I've got some Dean Martin tracks on my playlist, and his movie from the Rat Pack film, Ocean's 11, which is Ain't That a Kick in the Head, is always a great tune to play.
Oh, he made a believer out of you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chelsee, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, of course. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle, Square, Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 23,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by Bobby Morris. Trustworthy is her middle name, or it could be Tina. We really don't know. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another wildly modernist mixed grill edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.